Recently, there has been some criticism in news articles about readers on social media and book influencers, and how the rise in this culture is more about posing as a reader than actually reading. Lines such as the cult of book ownership, book fetishists, pawns in the hands of publishing houses, and treating having a lot of books as a stand-in for your personality. All of these are phrases that have been used in some of these articles. So as someone that spends a lot of time reading and also sharing what I've been reading online, I wanted to respond to and discuss some of these issues. I've also personally received occasional comments from viewers on my videos from people that will say, why don't you actually read books rather than just holding them up all of the time? Or some viewers that don't actually believe that I've read the books that I've said I've read. And these comments are sort of few and far between. The majority of comments I get are really lovely and engaged and interested. But yeah, I do occasionally get these things. And here I am making a video, sat in front of a huge towering shelf filled with books. So do book influencers, booktubers, and book talkers actually read? I'd also be curious to know your thoughts on all of this, and if your experience of reading has been positively or negatively impacted by interacting with other readers online. I mean, it could very well be both. First off, I want to discuss a Guardian article that was published in January with the heading, Reading is Precious, which is why I've been giving away my books. So this is inspired by a minimalist philosophy of purging hundreds of books and giving them away, as allowing readers a chance to read these books as well, which is fair enough. But she also refers to book fetishists who possess a contemporary tendency to treat having books as a sort of identity. So she characterizes this as a kind of cult, and the act of collecting so many books as being smug and middle class. So there's a lot of judgment going on here. I feel like the tendency for collecting books isn't so new. I mean, surely people have amassed large personal collections of books over long periods of time, ever since books first started being made. We just see more of it now because people are posting more about it on social media, and they'll post pictures of their bookshelves and books that they've just read or books that they want to read. So I don't really see how that's a contemporary tendency, and all the books you see behind me are books that I either already owned or would have acquired anyway in recent years, even if I wasn't taking pictures or making videos about them. Mainly all of the books that I actually keep on my shelves are ones that I've loved reading, or are books that I do really want to read or hope to read at some point, and that I think will be a bit difficult to find if I give them away. And I think something this article misses is just the joy and pleasure of returning to books. There are certain books I will go back to again and again, and one of the absolute thrills of loving a book so much and having read it a number of times is that you can return to it again and again and just read a passage or a certain section again, and because you know the book so well, you can just fall right back into it and experience that again and see it from a different point of view. So there are some books like The Waves by Virginia Woolf, which I've reread countless times, and when I go back to it, I discover new things as well as re-experiencing some of the pleasure that I first found when I read it for the very first time. And there are books like the stories of John Cheever, which I'll go back to again and again and read certain stories or reread certain stories, and I've had this so long that it is actually falling apart, so the pages are falling out of it. And there's also the journals of Joyce Carol Oates, which I go back to and read passages from this like quite a lot. Like frequently early in the morning, I'll just get up and like read some sections of it and feel inspired and motivated, and so that's a really wonderful thing. Also, only a finite number of books are actually printed of any given title. I mean, of course, there are certain famous titles which have gone through reprintings over and over again, but there are certain books, like many of the ones behind me, which haven't been reprinted and might be a bit more difficult to find. And so if I haven't read it yet, or if I've read it before and know I want to go back to it, then yeah, I want to keep a copy of it. I didn't acquire all of these books behind me just to have a backdrop for my videos. I did it because I was really interested in each and every one of these titles here but behind me. So I've acquired them over a long period of time, and I did a whole bookshelf tour video recently going through and trying to describe the joy of having all of these books here readily available, and the pleasure of just looking up at a bookshelf like this that I've amassed over a long period of time, and feeling such joy seeing all of them there. Sometimes I'll just look up at my bookshelves and it just makes me feel so happy. I can see why someone would want to occasionally purge a number of the books that they have in their possession, because as all of us book lovers know, the piles can start to get quite tall, and so it can become like a hoarding habit. And if you find your home is just filled with so many piles of books all around that you can't even get through the apartment, well, yeah, I would say that that's an issue, and it's probably time to let go of some of them. And I frequently have to do this because I have reached capacity of how many books I can actually contain in my apartment here in London. And it always feels like a difficult and painful thing to do this, to go through this pile of books and say, oh, I have to say goodbye to these, whether I've read them or not. But at the same time, as she does mention in the article, quite often I don't miss these books again after I've got rid of them, and I think that's true of any possessions that we amass over a long period of time. The impulse to give someone else the pleasure of experiencing these books is a good one, of course, and it's something that offsets the pain of getting rid of some books, is taking them to the charity shop, and then I know or hope that some other readers might discover some of these books and really enjoy reading them. But the way that the journalist goes about making claims about smugness, I think there's also a certain smugness in proudly proclaiming that how few books you own, and also your magnanimity in giving away some of these books and say, here, I give to you these books. And finally, something I don't think this journalist addresses is just what do you do with your bookshelves if you do give away most or all of your books? I mean, lots of readers, they will get bookshelves in order to house all of these books. So then if you give away all the books, what do you actually do with those bookshelves? What do you put on them? Do you just put little figurines or vases of flowers? I mean, that seems like a real waste of space. You'll also have to completely redesign your apartment or house because you suddenly have all of this space. So then what do you actually put in this space? I also want to discuss a more recent GQ article that had the headline, "In the shallow world of book talk, being a reader is more important than actually reading." So I'll put links below in the description to these articles if you want to read these full articles. And this article is by Barry Pierce, who is a former booktuber known as Baz Pierce, who I have a lot of affection for. He's very mischievous and has this whole arrogant side to him, but I think that's part of his charm. He sees BookTube as a precursor to Book Talk, so considers himself partly responsible for this phenomenon, and he takes a certain pride in describing himself as an early booktuber and states that his channel was one of the bigger ones, actually. And not to make this into a dick measuring contest, but who has more subscribers? He criticizes the homogeny found on Book Talk and how you see certain titles being shown off over and over and over again, and certain elaborate content that is made about certain books without actually discussing the content of them. And I think this is probably fair to a certain degree. I have to admit, I haven't dipped into the world of Book Talk all that much, just because I found it a bit overwhelming, and I just don't really have the patience for it to actually engage in it or to make content for it. Obviously, it's usually more interested in shorthand reactions to books rather than looking at them in depth, but this is partly due to time constraints and the format itself, which doesn't really allow these much larger discussions and talks about books that we can have here on YouTube. So I think it's partly about the medium, and obviously YouTube is trying to imitate and build upon that as well with YouTube Shorts. It does feel like you see a lot of the same books being shown over and over again, and this has boosted some backlisted titles into becoming bestsellers. But to be honest, I don't see this as being any different from other hobbies or interests. If you look at music and films, you often see a lot of the same albums and titles being shown and discussed over and over again. And usually there's a reason for this. Either they are so well done or enjoyable that they strike a chord with the wider population. I frequently like looking at a lot of these like best of lists of books, and frequently, if you look at these lists, you'll see the same titles appearing over and over again. This feels like an endemic part of our culture. It's what forms a culture. To criticize influencers for not actually reading books is a bit of a spurious claim, because you don't know how many books these creators are actually reading. And even if they only read a couple of books a year, does that mean that they're not readers or they're not good enough readers? Reading is necessarily a private activity, so how much you read and what you get out of it is only really between the reader and the book. So if creators aren't actually reading all the books they have, then it's really only their own loss. I've not read all of the books behind me, and I don't often read all of the books that I discuss in book haul videos or book prize videos, but that's because there's never enough time to read everything that I'd ideally like to. The intention and interest is there, and I do still read a lot, and I love it, and I wouldn't make content and videos and blog posts and posts on social media if I didn't want to share the experience of that. If I were doing it merely for popularity and money, there are many other things I could be talking about on social media platforms in order to gain more of a following and make more cash than talking about books. As far as it being part of my identity, well, I mean, I guess it is, because I spend a lot of time every day reading books or thinking about books or talking about books, and that's really all part of the reading process. I mean, I don't see sharing and discussing books as like separate from actually reading, because it enhances the reading experience so much. So I do get kind of annoyed at all of the backlash and snide comments made about people who discuss books online, and surely isn't this all part of our changing culture? And if part of this is helping drive sales of books and support the book industry, isn't that a good thing? If it helps encourage younger readers to jump on the bandwagon and read more widely, isn't that a good thing? If it prompts more discussion about certain books to add depth and enjoyment to the reading experience, isn't that a good thing? I'm sure such critiques will continue and there will be more of them, but it ultimately doesn't really matter to me what people think about how I read or how I share my passion for literature, because I'm the one that benefits from the pleasure of curling up with a good book. Please let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts or feelings about any of these issues. I'd love to hear more people's opinions about this, but I'm going to go back to reading now. I'm going to stop filming and go back to reading. I've currently just started Eleanor Catton's new novel, Burnham Wood, so I'm going to get to reading this now. Yep, look at me. I'm reading. Yep, I'm reacting. I'm filming myself reading it.